Good morning and welcome to the Church Development webinar on church financing. And this is a subject one should engage in as a planning activity before facility planning or a church capital campaign. And I feel very fortunate to be joined by a friend and expert, Charity Kuhn. Charity, thanks a million for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here. It's wonderful.
So how's the weather in Omaha today?
Good. The weather is rainy and dreary, but it's supposed to be in the 40s, so I'll take it. It's not in the teens, which we
So
saw last week.
are you about to have snow here in Kansas City? I'm looking out the window and it's a little overcast, but at least it's no snow.
Yes, I think we are actually supposed to get a little snow this afternoon, but it's going to be warm enough. It's not going to stick around, so
That's
fine. We could use the moisture. My husband actually mowed the front yard yesterday because he was hoping it would rain and maybe snow to
Well,
Yeah. So he was the crazy guy
that's optimistic. Good for him.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at your office. Are you in your corner office of the CEO right there?
No, not the corner office but I do actually. Just recently I moved to this office at the end of last year, and up until then I have been in an office that did not have a window for
Oh my gosh.
I don't know, 10 years.
Oh
So
my gosh.
enjoy
Well, when we were talking earlier, so you've been in banking for more than 20 years. Have you been with the same? How long have you been with Union Bank?
I will be here 18 years
Yeah.
at the beginning of May.
Wow, that's an impressive tenure.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, Union Bank is great. And funny, 18 years sounds like a long time, but I'm still sometimes considered the new kid on the block because in my department, there's a couple of people who are 25, 35,
That's
40,
impressive.
and that's been there for 40 years. First job out of college, stayed the whole time. He's getting ready to retire. So
Well, that's impressive. And it's impressive that they have a devoted department to church lending. That is a rarity. It's a rare and wonderful thing. And I'm very appreciative that you have volunteered. It's been great getting to know you through the Four Pillars Collaborative that has you, a banker and financial planner, and me, a fundraiser, and an architect who can help us understand costs and dimensions and best practices, and a visioning facilitator. It's great to have the four of us collaborating. And our next webinar coming up in a couple weeks will feature a church architect whose firm, RDG, has been part of planning hundreds of churches. Our webinar, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, you can get access to a recording from our previous webinar, which featured a church visioning facilitator. And this young lady has 20 years experience in serving faith-based institutions, which I would say are very different from corporations. I believe it's more complex and challenging to facilitate a vision amongst a group that is voluntarily based and faith-based. There are more variables. There's no dictatorial CEOs in that case. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Our topic is church financial planning before facility planning or a church capital campaign. We'll cover a lot of ground very quickly. I welcome your questions. At either the top or the bottom of your screen is a bar of icons. If you hover your mouse there, you will see there's a chat function. You may click on the chat and insert your questions. You can also text me. My phone number has been all over everything. We'll cover a lot of ground fast, but please do ask questions.
I don't know if she means to, but Deborah has her hand up, so I don't know if there is a question. Maybe.
Well, marvelous. Please do type your question in the chat function. I'm not sure that I have the technical ability to open the door to have a participant speak, but I do see Deborah has raised her hand. Thank you, Deborah, for raising your hand. We'll look for your question. When we're done, we will share these slides with you, and you can share them with anyone. And besides that, we've got probably 100 other webinars on our website. Click on that link under number 2. If you need further resources, give me a call. There's my number, or you can send me a text, and you can send an email to our admin at that email address. Church of Ullman has been around since 1992. Before 1992, I worked with all kinds of nonprofit organizations, from YMCA to Red Cross to colleges. So I've done the same work for about 40 years, which I know you're thinking, oh, that's when he was born. No, but almost. It's been a pleasure. It's how I met my wife. I've made many friends. I love the work. A Church of Ullman is quite different. The ask is based in prayerful discernment, not pressure. We really focus on building the community of the church. That's just very important to us. So there's a lot of consensus building. The visioning facilitator I mentioned earlier, those activities are extraordinarily important because it is a faith family. Our work is based in research. It extends from scripture, but it's based in a lot of research, and we collect data on what works and what doesn't work. And we help you increase your weekly giving for 3 years after the capital campaign. We also begin a planned giving program in your church after the capital campaign. My favorite scripture comes from 1 Peter 4:10, and each of us have been the recipients of God's manifold grace, and it's up to us to figure out what to do with those blessings. So I'm inspired by that every day. So here's our agenda. Number 1, we're going to talk about the big mistake, what it is, how to avoid it. Charity and I have seen it over and over again. Number 2, what do you need to know to prepare your church for being a good loan candidate? Charity has to look at these things every single day, and she can advise you right now to start thinking about what you need to do. Number 3, you'll be able to talk to a real live banker, Charity, to ask her, what does a bank look at to determine your loan size? And I really like the guidance about what to not do. You know, how much can we borrow and how much is too much? Because I have 2 experiences in my life where churches have borrowed too much, and it has just strangled them financially. It's really hurt their ministries. So start preparing your questions now. We're going to leap into action. This is my profile. I've been doing this for churches for more than 30 years, raised a ton of money. I've written 4 books. Here's one of them. If you give me a call or send me an email, I'll send you this book. It's got a lot of our research in it, a lot of case studies that you can learn from. The sources of data for this webinar and that book mainly come from our many capital campaigns that we have done, and we study vigorously what works and what does not work. And then beyond that, we look for research from the secular world. I'm a big fan of the person who got the Nobel Prize for creating the field of behavioral economics, Daniel Kahneman. I'm a member of the International Catholic Stewardship Council, the National Association of Church Business Administrators, which is now called the Network, and many other organizations that inform us that I can then directly share with the church world. So you're really getting the benefit of not just church experience, but the corporate and academic world as well. And this is Charity, who you see before you. She is a bona fide church loan expert, having managing a portfolio of $150 million, but that doesn't count the many dollars she has loaned out over the past more than 10 years. And we know each other through the 4 Pillars Collaborative. Charity, what else would you say about yourself to introduce yourself to these folks?
Well, I'll just talk a little bit on the personal side, I guess. I'm a mom of 4 girls. I've worked at this bank for almost 18 years. And Dennis has on here, I'm a golfer. He did not put I was a good golfer, just a golfer. So that's accurate. My family, we all golf. So it's a great thing that we do together. I have been lending to churches exclusively for a little over 10 years, about 12 years. And I love that. It's a great opportunity for me to have faith and business collide completely and be able to be very fulfilled in my job because I can touch two worlds that generally don't like each other and bring them together so that it's a good experience.
Yeah, that's so cool. You can combine your faith and your skill. Yeah, that is wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Charity.
Thanks for
Okay,
having
so here is our agenda. And, I really benefit a lot from that great American philosopher, Chuck Norris, who said, the key to success is to figure out what doesn't work and then don't do that. So I love that. So let's start with that one, Charity. The common disastrous mistake. And I love it that I found this picture of a train wreck because I've seen it happen. And I would welcome your take on the disaster, and I'll share my take too. But how often do you see, and go ahead and describe your perception of the common mistake?
Yeah, so I see it fairly often that the planning gets out of order and churches get very excited about something that they end up not being able to do. So my best example of this is they are clients, and they have been since almost the beginning of when we started lending to churches. But it's a Baptist church that has been around 200 years, a very old congregation that was super excited to expand their ministry to a new location in a newer part of town, and had an architect draw them a very beautiful building that was elaborate and large. And then they were not able to find anyone to finance for years. So they had a lovely rendering in the middle of their office building where everyone could see all of the things that they were not able to achieve day after day. And it really was difficult, and it was very, very, very frustrating for them. And luckily, we were able to back out of that large, elaborate plan into something a little bit smaller, but it was a very painful experience. It's very hard on the congregation. And so and I know Dennis has lots of stories like this, and I'm sure we'll get to hear one, but what the whole point of these kinds of conversations really points to is, let's not let that happen to somebody else. That's a major goal of both Dennis and I and all the folks in the Four Pillars. Let us help you do this in the right order so that you don't end up with something beautifully drawn that you can never achieve.
Right. And then that's throwing away money. I mean, architects are worth it, certainly, but to pay an architect to create a beautiful design and then you just got to put it on a shelf, you have just squandered. And we're supposed to be good stewards.
Yes.
And so we want to avoid waste. So what happens next is what Charity just said. They have to go back and do it all over again. They have to begin at square one where they should have started, and asking Charity, well, Charity, what do you think the financial picture could look like for a church like us? And then Charity would ask a bunch of questions and help create a realistic financial plan. Now, I like working with Charity because I can give her phone number away to any church I'm working with. They can call her and immediately get a sense of what might that financial picture look like. She can also call me and we talk, and I will share with her and she will share with her clients. A church could do more than one capital campaign. They could do 2 or 3. Mine did 4 in a row. That's kind of unusual, but that helps her create a realistic financial plan. So I think under item C on your agenda, the financial plan is a great place to start. So what is realistically possible? Then it's time to pull in an expert to help you build that consensus-based vision for your church. And it does you no good to create $100 million vision if your budget realistically is $3 million. As a fundraiser, I can tell you right away, there are best practices, and we talk about them in the book. If you've been through anything for 30 years, you get to know what the realistic parameters are and what falls outside of those parameters. We can help you set realistic goals. You hope for the best, prepare for the worst, but you're going to be full of common sense. And at that point, you can go on to number 4, engage an architect to do master planning based on your consensus-based vision and based on a realistic financial plan. The architect will be much happier and not embarrassed and not need to go back and redo the project over and over again. All right, let's shift to number 2. So, Charity, you're an expert. Thinking of the 35 people that signed up for this webinar, who will no doubt share it with their committees as they're thinking about a facility, what do they need to know to prepare their church for being a good loan candidate?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I really want to kind of hit on today. So the folks that are listening to this, that I feel are the most important. And the first thing I want to talk about is just having a clear plan of what it is that you hope to accomplish and being able to communicate that, as well as having quality financial statements. And I think later in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about financial statements, but I can tell you that one of the biggest pitfalls, I guess would be the best word, is for a church to come and put in front of me financial statements that don't make any sense to me. Not that they don't make sense to you, but they don't make any sense to me. And right away, if you give a bank something that doesn't make sense and it has to do with numbers, your loan is going to be set aside. And it's going to be difficult for them to get their arms around it. So that's the very most important thing, is quality financial statements. So that's the number one thing that the bank is looking for.
All right.
I think a couple of things. You want to find a bank who understands church before you go too far, because if they don't, even if you have quality financial statements, they may not know what they're looking for in a good loan. So that's really important. I think too, along with financial statements, somebody at the church is able to communicate with the bank about your needs so a point person, I think, is another thing a bank is looking for, is somebody that they feel like is knowledgeable within your church, whether it's your pastor or executive pastor, who knows what's going on before you contact the bank. So there's some prep on your side, and it can be with someone like me. Now, I will say I am a bank, yes, but I do a lot of consulting for churches who are preparing to provide their information to a bank. And eventually that will hopefully be me, but I have lots of conversations about what do we need to do? Where do we need to make changes? How does this look to you? So having somebody like that early on in your process is really important.
That's great. Well, having an expert in any endeavor is a good idea, whether it's a car mechanic or a plumber consulting an expert. And at what point do you have to start charging them for advice?
Oh, well, it's a little hard to charge for advice in this business. I do a lot of consulting up front. That's just a phone call or maybe a Zoom call. The idea, hopefully, is that at the end of the day, I'm able to help most of the people who come, through the line or through the door, and get them a loan with my bank. So, that's really where the business side of things comes in. Up to that point, it's really about doing what's right and helping you to get your church to a place where they're able to move forward and accomplish the goals that your committees and your pastors have set.
Yeah, well, that's great. I know that's a very kind way of giving. I'm sure it's good for business, but I think that's a great way to do business, to give away your knowledge, to help people who are perhaps are going through a church loan for the first time in their life and maybe the last time, to adequately prepare. Now, we got 3 questions that are already popped up. Okay. Is a 30-year term loan normal for a church loan?
So we do 25 is the max. There are some lenders who will do 30. I find that's fairly rare. It's mostly foundations that are maybe within your denomination that will go far out. To be very honest, we used to say 20 is as long as we want to go, but now we're very commonly doing 25. That's being said, the point is really that we do try to encourage our churches to pay their loans off even faster than that, because that's a good steward of the money that you're being given, to not pay a bunch of it to interest, but to try to get yourself, principal paid and in a great financial situation. So we help you to accomplish
that. Okay, well, that's great. Okay, here's another one. We have a 6-month reserve. Does that tell you that we are well managed?
It actually does. It's a great, I have some notes here of things that I'm hoping to get to hit on. And thank you for asking that question, because liquidity is very important. And a lot of churches, as they're getting ready to borrow, have not necessarily prepared themselves for a bank digging into their numbers. So what their mission has been up to that point is to utilize the money they're given for good things. And that's great. But if you're going to get ready to borrow, a bank is going to want to see that if times get a little rough, if the economy, if we have a pandemic, you're going to have some money sitting aside that you can utilize to get you through that time period, because now you're being held accountable by a financial institution. So that's 6 months reserve is an excellent amount.
Okay, great. And this is maybe the question everybody wants to know. How much can I borrow?
That's a great question. I have a couple of kind of nice little cheat tools that I think are great, and they hold pretty true. One of them is, if you want to just quick and easy look at it, the maximum amount you should borrow is 4 times your annual giving. So not any other incomes, not preschools, not rental space, just contributions, 4 times that number. That's should be a top number for you. Now, with that being said, that's borrowing. So it doesn't necessarily mean project. There could be a whole component of church development coming in and doing a campaign for you. And by the way, I haven't plugged Dennis, but Dennis is awesome. His company is a very great company.
Nice.
If you're needing some fundraising, I do think that I recommend him every time. So side note, but that doesn't mean project, it's meaning loan. So I just want to be clear on that. And then the other nice number to always look at, and I think this is a great gauge for your church, is you do not want your principal and interest payments to be more than 30% of your annual budget. So just like as you look at your budget for how much your house payment should be, it's a similar type of a ratio. We do not want you as a church to be house poor, so that the only thing you can do each month is pay the mortgage. You have a beautiful building, you can pay the mortgage, but you don't have any ministry, or your ministry suffers because you're having to make such a large payment. So 30% of your annual budget or less is how much your payment should be. Those are 2 quick and easy ways to figure out nice size loans for your church.
Okay, well, popped up just related to that, the bottom line on your screen, how much is too much? You said 4 times annual giving. So what happens when a church borrows too much?
When a church borrows too much, it's disastrous. We are very responsible in what we lend to our church clients, but not everybody is. And we've been through times in history where churches were lent too much money. Then you can't make your payment, or you have to negotiate a situation with your bank that you're only making interest payments. You're not able to do any really good things with the contributions that are coming into your church, other than just keep your head above water. So my 100% goal anytime I do a loan is to make sure that church is going to be successful within that loan. The very, very, very last thing I ever want is to have to go through the pain with the church of what happens when you can't. And it's very difficult. So we make it a mission to ensure we're not putting you in a situation.
Yeah, well, that's prudent. Over over my career, I remember two disasters like that. And one was a Presbyterian church. I can't remember their name, but their loan, I remember distinctly looking at the numbers and thinking, gosh, that's 10 times annual giving. And I remember hearing the pastor and the committee lament that we have no money for ministry. We have to pay for the loan, which pays for this fantastic building, but that's your fantastic building kind of becomes irrelevant if you don't have the activities to fill that building. That's just a disaster. There was one Presbyterian and one Catholic, and both the same kind of phenomenon. It's just 10 times annual giving is just too much.
That's too much. And the stress that it puts on the people involved is just so hard to experience. We want to make sure we don't let that happen.
Okay, here's another question. We only need to raise 2 times annual giving. Will this be a quick and easy loan?
There's so many factors that it's difficult for me to say, oh yes, for sure. But that's a very nice size to be. If your annual giving number, if you're looking for a loan 2 times, that's a very good, what I would say, a happy spot to be. Of course, there's a lot of other factors in the underwriting of an actual loan, but no, I think that is a good size loan for most of the education.
Okay, great. Okay, let's move on to number 3. So as a banker, what do you look at in order to determine loan size and qualification? And then as a fundraiser, I personally am interested in, how do you think about capital campaigns, and how do you think of fundraising? Because I'm sure that you're the pro, but then you have a banking committee, a committee within your bank, a loan committee to process. What else do they look for, and how do they look at fundraisers and capital campaigns?
Yeah, those are all great questions. So I'm gonna start with statements, because I mentioned this earlier, and I'll just briefly tell you about the process. So when you are ready to ask for a loan, and you call me up and you say, what are you going to need to take a look at us for a loan? I'm going to ask you to send me your annual financial statements for the last 3 years. So you need 3 years of financial statements, and that's a balance sheet and an income statement. And maybe some people call it profit and loss statements. So, but basically income and expense and balance sheet. Those 2 statements should tie together, and each year they should tie year over year. This is a very common spot where churches get hung up, because they have been handling their books from the time that they started the church with either a volunteer or a part-time administrator of some sort. Now they've grown to the size that they're ready to build. They're big enough to be able to do it. All of those things are there, but they've not made that transition to a higher quality financial statement. So what I suggest, I have a couple of things. If you're going to ask for more than $2 million, I am going to suggest to you that you get a CPA involved in your financials. And there's a cost to that, and I understand, but your success rate with banks and your ability to even get banks to compete for your business is going to be based on how well you're financially presented. And so if you don't have statements that make sense to a bank, or year over year they don't tie out, which means there's discrepancies year over year, you're going to have a hard time convincing one, let alone multiple banks, to take a look at your loan. So probably the most important thing to do, most important preparation. What we will do, if you are going to borrow more than $2 million, hopefully you'll have had a CPA involved, or at least financial statements that are very clear. And then we're going to ask you to do a review quality statement going forward. So it's something to prepare in your head that if you're going to borrow over $2 million, probably the bank is going to want you to have an annual review done by a CPA. A couple things to prepare you. Once you provide that financial statement, then what we do is I have a loan questionnaire that has a list of items that we want you to put together. And so we're going to want to look at the people who are in your congregation that give. How much do they give each year? How consistent is that? What's your attendance like? What's your growth rates like? And all of that kind of comes on a list of items that we're going to take a look at. Preparing for that, it's great to have somebody, and I'm happy to be that person just to have one-on-one conversation with you about what is it that we need to have in line before we start contacting banks. And to have that person be able to tell you what records you need to pull up and what details you need to look at. So it is great to have somebody who knows exactly what a bank's going to look at, help you get prepared. As far as how long does it take, once you have all of those items in line and a package of information together, if you are able to put that together all in kind of a concise little bundle and hand it out or email it to several banks, usually I say you're going to have to prepare for about 4 weeks of loan underwriting. So it's going to take a bank about a month to get through your packet, to get the approval for you, to get back with you with some sort of a commitment. Once they give you a commitment, it could take another 4 to 8, depending on what you're doing, weeks to close. Most of the time, you're going to have an appraisal. You'll have to have title work. So depending on your state, how quickly does the title work go? That, there's some things that are out of your control, that are out of your bank's control. So you need to plan for about a 3-month period of time preparing to get a loan to the point where you're actually going to close them.
Okay. So about 2 months. This would be
3 months. Yep.
Well, I'm just curious, how often do you, in your role, even looking at other banks and other loans, see a church loan not work out and a church unable to fulfill their commitments? And then what happens when that happens?
So you mean we've done a loan and then
Yeah, and then the church can't pay off the loan, and then you've got a loan against their church building. Does that ever happen?
I can't say never. My personal experience in the last 10 years is only one time. Did we ever have to say, did I ever have to say, we're going to have to do something drastically different? And in that case, the church had to sell their building. And a lot of factors went into it. The congregation became split for a whole bunch of drama that we don't want to talk about today. But things happen, they were a good congregation when we did the loan. This is life and reality, and stuff changes, and things don't always go the way they're supposed to. So what I think one of the things that I am most proud of as an organization is that we are very work with you. We literally tried everything to make that work for that church. And in the end, we just ran out of options, and they knew it too. They ran out of options. So we are going to try to get the church family in the best possible situation we can. We're not about taking back a church building. We don't want to have a church building. That is not our goal. So in 12 years, one time, most of the time, and then not that we haven't had other churches who've had issues, because we just went through a pandemic. A lot of churches came through that wonderful. In fact, better than they were. And we're doing tons of building projects now because people put stuff on hold. But a few churches suffered. They weren't able to be nimble and adjust. And so we're walking alongside those churches, helping them get back to being healthy.
Well, that's really great that you see yourself as a collaborative team member caring about the church's well-being. That's what I would want if I was getting a church loan, and I really value expertise. It's just, there's nothing, that's like the one single benefit of being old, as I've been through a few things. So I kind of know what to expect. And it's great that you bring the expertise for your more than 10 years in church loans, more than 20 years in bank loans to help churches, because churches are just so very important.
Yeah.
Okay, another question that's kind of sideways. How do you think of loans from members? So I'm assuming that this person is asking they have loans from members on their balance sheet. How do you think of those things?
Yes, and I didn't address capital campaign either. You had asked that. So loans from members, you know, we generally view them as positive. The only issues that there would be is if that it causes the church to have less ability to pay. So depending on the structure of those loans, we've done some very creative financing. In fact, the customer that Dennis and I work with, that's just down the road here in Omaha, who has come up with every creative way to fund their project, because there's just so many pieces to it. And some of that includes member loans, and some of it includes non-member loans, as well as a bank. So, you know, we're able to be flexible and to try to come up with solutions that don't necessarily fit the mold. So I hope that answers that question. And I want to address capital campaign. Of course, capital campaigns, they're great. They're going to, you know, help you to pay for your project. We generally don't consider them collateral. A lot of people ask that, you know, are you considering that the funds that are going to be coming in, is that collateral of some sort? No. So one important way to look at it, I always tell a church that if you're going to do a building project and you have a $3 million campaign and it's coming in over 3 years, but you want to start now, whatever you have in your hand plus your loan amount, if you add those together, that's how much your project cost should be. We want you to have in your hand enough money to finish the building, or pretty darn close anyway. And then the money that's coming in from the capital campaign can be to pay down the loan. Maybe pay it down really quickly, you know, but you might need a little larger construction loan, knowing that you're going to receive those capital campaign funds over 3 years. So I hope that.
Okay, so you don't look at capital campaigns in a negative way. You look at it as, well, here's a way that you're going to pay back our loan.
Absolutely. There's nothing negative about capital. It's only positive. It's just how that fits in, whether it's on the front side of the construction, during the construction, or after the construction.
Okay, so I'm happy to hear that you see it as a common, well expected best practice.
Yes. There's a
does-
couple questions on the, I don't know if you want me to address those, or do you?
No, you're fire away.
Okay. So someone's asking about financial statements. Yes, you should include the valuation of your property on your financial statement. So for that person, I would, if you're not currently doing that, I would address that a question with an accountant to see how you should be valuing that. And then Monica's asking about Newman Center. So Newman Center, we're going to look at a little differently, because, and we have worked with the Newman Center here in Lincoln. So you're right, your contributions are completely different. Your students aren't going to fund your center, probably. It's going to be the support of the diocese. So rather than, Monica, if you want to contact me, we can talk about that individually. I can maybe help you with a few ideas.
Well, that's great that you have that experience with Newman Centers. You can share with them what works and what does not work. That's magnificent. You know, when you mentioned the client that you're working with that had multiple creative streams of income, just by chance, I was talking to that client yesterday. And I am sure they have communicated to you their gratitude. But what the person's name is John, and I don't know if he would want me to share this publicly, but the way he described your dexterity just made it sound like you walked on water. So you should know you've got a really good fan, at least one, if not hundreds,
Aw,
who would recommend you to anyone. And I'm sure he would share his experience with anybody who asks.
I appreciate John a lot. So thanks for sharing that.
Well, yeah, he is. Very creative guy, very intelligent and thoughtful. Okay, so we have covered everything and we've gone a little bit over longer than I thought. And now just to remind our participants today, this webinar is available in a recording. You will get the recording, I think, tomorrow. And there are additional slides beyond this. There's a couple books that I recommend, Best Practices in Parish Stewardship by Zach. He is one of my heroes. The research, comes out of Villanova. And one of the best parts of that book is how important it is to ask for a donation based on a percentage rather than a dollar amount. And this was a new insight to me when I read the research, and now we do that in all of our capital campaigns, and it really works. Stewardship in your congregation is extremely important, and stewardship does not mean fundraising. It really means facilitating a person's faith journey through understanding all that we have as a blessing from God, and it's up to us to figure out how to be a conduit for that blessing. So church development has a ton of resources. Among them, charity is one of them. If you have questions, we can connect you to a visioning facilitator, an architect who can help you estimate the cost of your facility improvements. Charity, the expert in church loans, and me, the expert in church capital campaigns, and all of us will talk to you for free. And if you want to be connected with one of those resources, give me a call or an email. I would happily share those with you. That's my number and that's my email address. You can also go to our website. And we have tons of resources to give you. That's why we exist. So Charity, before we conclude, any last thoughts before we conclude today?
Well, I want to say, anybody on the webinar or who listens to the webinar later, you're welcome to also contact me with questions. I spent a lot of my time just chatting with churches about what they're wanting to do and brainstorming and thinking, how might we make this work? So I'm happy to do that. You're welcome to contact me anytime.
Great. Thanks so much for being a volunteer. And thank you to everybody who has joined us today. Go forth, good luck, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dennis.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye.